The war between Russia and Ukraine has reached dimensions that will shake the dynamics in the Pacific. The fact that North Korea has deployed nearly 12,000 troops to the war fronts for Russia, with 500 of them are Special Forces personnel, and nearly 8,000 Pyongyang troops have already participated in clashes in Kursk has begun to seriously worry China. If the war spreads fully to the Pacific, it could directly threaten the security of Northeast Asia. And this would not sit well with China, which is competing with the US in the global economic competition arena. This is why China is preparing strategic moves to avert the growing threat between Russia and North Korea, seeking to distance Pyongyang's leader, Kim Jong-un, from Vladimir Putin, the head of the Kremlin. So what can China do? What are the Beijing government's plans? Let's take a deeper look at how the balance between these three countries has shifted following North Korea's deployment of troops to the Ukrainian front for Russia, and what China is doing to prevent this. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like so that you can stay up to date with our content. It was actually the US and South Korea that woke China up to the fact that the North Korea-Russia alliance was becoming increasingly threatening. After Pyongyang sent thousands of troops to Russia to help Moscow's war against Ukraine, the US and South Korea called on China to use its influence over Russia and North Korea to prevent escalation. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the two sides had held extensive discussions this week, and that he was aware of China's expectations that the United States would use its influence to work to curb these activities. At a press conference in Washington with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and his South Korean counterparts, that China's need to stop the growing danger between Russia and North Korea is a signal of demand not only from them but from countries around the world. After all these calls, Beijing has also broken its silence on the issue. Liu Pengyu, spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington, said in a statement that the Beijing government's position on the Ukraine crisis is consistent and clear. Liu emphasized that China is committed to peace talks and a political solution to the Ukrainian crisis. Although Beijing has built an unlimited partnership with Moscow and is an important ally for Pyongyang, experts believe Beijing may not approve of a closer military partnership between Russia and North Korea because it is destabilizing in the region. Shi Yinhong, an international relations expert at China's Renmin University, said that the Russia-North Korea partnership contradicts Beijing's goal of a peaceful Korean peninsula. China's warning messages against the North Korea-Russia alliance are therefore likely to become more strident over time. Beijing recognizes the complexity and danger of the situation, Shi Yinhong said, adding that the fact that China has not yet said anything about the military alliance agreement between North Korea and Russia shows that China strongly opposes it. On the other hand, Dennis Wilder, senior fellow at the Initiative for U.S.-China Dialogue on Global Issues at Georgetown University, described Beijing's silence on North Korea's move as surprising. He added that Beijing needs to find a balance between supporting Moscow and not angering the West, and that Chinese President Xi Jinping could ignore the whole issue for his own good. Speaking at a panel discussion hosted by the Washington-based think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies this week, Wilder also stressed that Xi has built a personal relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin and cannot afford to let Putin fail. According to him, Xi doesn't want to anger the Europeans and Americans when his country's economy is in trouble. So for China right now, there is probably a combination of a little bit of exasperation, a little bit of panic, and a little bit of a feeling of not knowing what to do about the current situation. Experts believe that it is unclear whether Beijing was informed in advance of Pyongyang's move to send troops on Moscow's behalf. Beijing is also said to be worried about Russia gaining more influence over North Korea than China. China does not want to lose North Korea, normally one of its most important allies in the region, to Russia. China experienced this fear most recently at the BRICS summit. While North Korean officials did not comment on the reports, which were also voiced by Kiev and Seoul, the Kremlin initially denied the reports about North Korean troops, but Russian President Vladimir Putin did not deny the allegations of North Korean troop deployment when asked at the BRICS summit last week. Chinese officials, on the other hand, told the press that Beijing had demanded a de-escalation of tensions in the Ukrainian war because of its concern over the deployment of North Korean troops in Ukraine. The Chinese reaction was seen as a warning to Pyongyang, given its new involvement in the European conflict and its aggressive stance towards its southern neighbor, threatening to embroil its Indo-Pacific ally in two geopolitical crises. Although China has in the past tried to broker a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, it has been accused of supplying Putin with weapons used in the conflict, and has repeatedly refused to condemn the invasion. Therefore, China's criticism of North Korea's move to send troops to fight on Russian soil in Ukraine came as a shock. The fact that this was again a topic of discussion at the BRICS summit was a clear warning from China directly to North Korea and indirectly to Russia. China's warning to North Korea is probably meant to prevent the West from entertaining the idea of further military support and even possible troop deployment to South Korea. Regarding the situation on the Korean peninsula, the Beijing government demanded that the relevant parties directly confront the essence of the Korean peninsula issue and play a constructive role to reduce tensions, promote dialogue, and maintain peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. North Korea has recently begun strengthening its positions near the demilitarized zone, deployed troops near the border, and threatened Seoul with military retaliation following reports that a South Korean drone had entered its airspace. These actions, and recently confirmed reports that Pyongyang has sent troops to Russia, create a difficult balancing act for China, one of the country's few global allies. But in the wake of China's recent warnings to North Korea, Pyongyang is likely to be more cautious in its plans for South Korea. China's economic aid to North Korea accounts for about half of all Chinese foreign aid. Kim Jong-un, therefore, cannot refuse such economic resources from Xi Jinping. The Chinese side plans to issue the same warning on behalf of Russia. China also has considerable leverage over Russia. Jonathan Ward, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, a Washington-based think tank, predicts that Russia's war in Ukraine will fail without the direct economic and industrial support of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. This is also the opinion of war analysts and military experts. China is therefore capable of indirectly warning Russia against such a deep alliance with North Korea. Russia, like North Korea, has to listen to China, which it sees as its big brother. So Putin will either end up listening to Kim Jong's call for war, or he will heed Xi Jinping's warning and put an end to this madness. If this insanity between Russia and North Korea does not stop, things could get even worse for China. What makes things more difficult for China at the moment is that North Korea's decision to send troops to help Russia has deepened security cooperation between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. And this trilateral security cooperation continues to pressure China on issues related to Taiwan and the South China Sea. Experts have analyzed that since Kim Jong-un's first visit to China as North Korean leader in March 2018, the US and its allies have pressured China to rein in North Korea, but to no significant effect, leaving China in a difficult position vis-a-vis North Korea and Russia. In fact, there are some reasons for this situation. The Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance between China and North Korea, signed in 1961, stipulates that if one of the signatories is under armed attack by any state and enters a state of war, the other party will immediately provide military and other assistance by all means at its disposal. There is external speculation as to whether China would be forced to get involved if North Korea sent troops to help Russia. First, it is thought that China is reluctant to go back to the 1950s, so its basic stance is not to send troops or get involved in the war. Secondly, it is speculated that China is trying to marginalize and eliminate the so-called military alliance clause, despite the existence of the said treaty. However, the North Korean side must have foreseen China's behavior, and, despite all the economic aid from Beijing, is taking some reckless steps to show its deep alliance with Russia more clearly to the world and to oppose the U.S. cooperation with its allies in the Pacific. In response to the change in the situation with North Korean troops going to Russia, and under the intense diplomatic mediation of various countries, North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile into the East Sea, also known as the Sea of Japan, on October 31st. The missile's flight time exceeded the flight time of previously tested weapons. According to Yonhap News Agency, Pyongyang launched the missile 5 hours after the defense ministers of the United States and South Korea strongly condemned North Korea for sending troops to help Russia. This act of firing the missile may have been designed to express displeasure. At the same time, Pyongyang may have used it as a signal to divert international attention away from the Russia-Ukraine conflict and to make its presence felt before the U.S. presidential elections. The outcome of the U.S. presidential elections will also be an important variable in the further development of the Russia-Ukraine war and how North Korean troops can help Russia. In a meeting with Zelensky in New York this September, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump said that if elected, he could reach a mutually beneficial agreement to end the Russia-Ukraine war. The Pentagon is now saying that the U.S. will not impose new restrictions on Ukraine's use of American weapons if North Korea joins Russia's war. The Pentagon statement comes after White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said last week that if North Korean troops were deployed to fight against Ukraine, they would be a legitimate target. Before the elections, the United States was also seen to be moving ahead with military assistance packages for Ukraine. Just before the elections, the U.S. sent a $425 million arms package to Ukraine. The White House has approved a new $425 million military aid package for Ukraine as it continues to repel Russian aggression. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced the shipment, which was withdrawn from the president's presidential withdrawal authority and includes a number of critical defense supplies. Presidential withdrawal authority allows the president to quickly transfer military equipment directly from Defense Department stockpiles to allied countries in emergency situations, bypassing standard congressional approvals. The military assistance package includes Stinger missiles, air-to-ground ammunition, additional shells for the National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, or NASAMS, and High Mobility Artillery Rocket Systems, or HIMARS, and 155mm and 105mm artillery shells. Other items include unmanned aerial vehicles, tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided missiles, Javelin, and AT-4 anti-tank weapons, Stryker armored personnel carriers, small arms and ammunition, medical supplies, and other essential items needed to sustain Ukraine's defense operations. Antony Blinken said in a press release that this latest aid package demonstrates the United States' commitment to increasing the security assistance to Ukraine that Congress has approved. Blinken added that the administration is determined to exhaust its remaining support before President Joe Biden leaves office. The United States has been the largest donor to Ukraine, providing more than $64.1 billion in military aid since Russia's full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022. This huge figure is seen as one of the most important proofs that the U.S. will continue to provide such aid in the future. The Chinese side, on the other hand, is concerned that the US is strengthening Ukraine to such an extent and increasing cooperation and military policies with South Korea in the Pacific. The addition of thousands of North Korean troops to the Ukrainian conflict could also fuel geopolitical tensions on the Korean Peninsula and in the wider Indo-Pacific region, including Japan and Australia. South Korea has said it is considering upgrading its support for Ukraine from non-lethal aid to defensive and even offensive weapons. None of this is good news for Beijing. Not only does it undermine the narrative that China is a peacekeeper compared to the United States, but it also undermines the narrative that Western countries should stay out of Asian defense issues as the Indo-Pacific joins Europe's security discussions. Adding to the list of potential concerns for China is the question of what Moscow is willing to do in exchange for additional troops. Russia helping North Korea develop its nuclear capability could accelerate an arms race in the region. But some analysts believe that Beijing is turning a blind eye to North Korea's arms and personnel shipments in order to reduce pressure on Russia to provide direct military assistance. In this case, China may be navigating a much more unstable terrain, but it still appears to be in the driver's seat. In short, both Moscow and Pyongyang will prioritize their ties with Beijing over the other. And if China really wants to put the brakes on where North Korea and Russia are going, it will still have the leverage to do so. So China, not wanting to be left behind in the power competition with the United States and seeking to keep itself at the forefront in the Pacific, will eventually thwart Russia and North Korea's efforts to attract Western attention with their troop deployment plans. Thank you for following us.